The foreclosure notice felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. Its legal language cold and precise, countdown to catastrophe measured in business days rather than broken dreams. 72 hours. That's what the bold print announced. 72 hours before the sheriff's department would arrive with moving trucks and court orders, before everything my family had built over 15 years would become someone else's property, before the house that held every important memory of my 18 years would be locked behind us forever. I sat in our living room at 2 a.m., surrounded by the silence that only exists in houses about to be lost, holding that notice like it contained instructions for dismantling my entire life. Around me, everything looked exactly as it always had. The family photos on the mantle, the coffee table my dad had built in the garage, the couch where I'd spent countless hours doing homework and dreaming about futures that suddenly seemed impossible. But now every familiar object felt temporary, borrowed, already belonging to the bank that would soon own everything we couldn't afford to keep. The mortgage payment we'd missed wasn't just money, it was time, measured in the 72 hours before our family's stability became our family's history. My parents had given up 3 weeks earlier. Not dramatically, not with tears or anger, but with the quiet resignation that comes when you've exhausted every legitimate option and run out of hope that legitimate options are enough. They were upstairs sleeping the heavy sleep of people who had accepted defeat, who had made peace with losing everything because fighting seemed more painful than surrendering. But I wasn't ready to surrender. Maybe it was the arrogance of youth. Maybe it was the stupidity of inexperience. Maybe it was just the stubborn refusal to believe that 18 years of calling somewhere home could be erased by numbers on a balance sheet that didn't care about our family story. 72 hours to save everything my family had built, and I was the only one left who still believed it was possible. My name is Jordan Mitchell, and I grew up believing that home was the one thing that couldn't be taken away from you if you worked hard enough to earn it. Our house on Cedar Street wasn't the biggest or newest in the neighborhood, but it was ours. Purchased with my father's construction wages and my mother's teacher salary, improved through weekend projects and careful budgeting, filled with the kind of memories that make a building into a sanctuary. Dad had bought the house in 2008, right after he married Mom, when I was 3 years old, and everything seemed possible for a young black family willing to work for their piece of the American dream. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with good bones and infinite potential, the kind of place where you could raise children and build equity and prove that stability was achievable through determination and sacrifice. For 15 years, Dad had poured his heart into that house. Every room told the story of his craftsmanship, crown molding he'd installed by hand, hardwood floors he'd refinished during summer vacations, the deck he'd built when I turned 10 so we could have family barbecues and birthday parties. Mom had contributed her own touches. The garden that bloomed every spring, the reading nook she'd created in the living room, the way she'd arranged furniture to make our modest space feel warm and welcoming. The house had been our proof that we belonged, that we had built something permanent in a world that seemed designed to keep families like ours temporarily housed. Every mortgage payment had been a small victory, every home improvement project a declaration that we were investing in our future rather than just surviving our present. I was the younger of 2 children, with an older sister, Maya, who had graduated from college 2 years earlier and was working as a social worker in Chicago. Maya had always been the academic star of our family, while I was more interested in technology and entrepreneurship. Throughout high school, I had built websites for local businesses, managed social media accounts, and developed apps that had modest success in school competitions. My parents supported my entrepreneurial interests, but had always emphasized the importance of education as the foundation for any success I might achieve. The plan was for me to attend State University in the fall, majoring in computer science with a focus on business applications. I had been accepted with partial scholarship coverage, and we had calculated that between Dad's steady construction income and the money I'd saved from my various tech ventures, college would be affordable without taking on crushing debt. But plans, I learned, are only as stable as the circumstances that create them. And circumstances can change with the speed of a phone call, a medical diagnosis, or an economic downturn that transforms steady employment into desperate unemployment. The crisis had begun 18 months earlier when Dad fell from scaffolding at a commercial construction site, breaking his back in 2 places and damaging his spine severely enough to require multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation. The injury ended his career in construction. Work that required physical strength and stamina, he would never fully recover. Workers' compensation covered the immediate medical expenses, but the bureaucratic maze of forms, appeals, and delays meant months of uncertain income, while Dad fought for the benefits he had earned through 15 years of dangerous, skilled labor. The physical therapy sessions, prescription medications, and ongoing medical care created expenses that insurance covered partially, but never completely. While Dad was learning to walk without constant pain, Mom tried to maintain our family's financial stability on her teacher's salary alone. But a single income that had been supplementary was inadequate as the primary source of support for a family with a mortgage, medical bills, and the everyday expenses of raising a teenager. The stress affected every aspect of our family dynamics. Dad became quiet and withdrawn, struggling not just with physical pain, but with the psychological trauma of watching his role as provider disappear through circumstances beyond his control. Mom worked overtime tutoring students and teaching summer school, but her additional efforts couldn't generate enough income to replace what Dad had earned. I postponed my college plans and took on full-time work at a local tech startup, hoping that my programming skills could translate into income substantial enough to help bridge the gap between what we owed and what we could afford. But teenage wages, even in technology, couldn't replace adult income, especially when that income had supported 15 years of mortgage payments and living expenses. The foreclosure process had begun 6 months earlier, when we fell behind on mortgage payments for the third consecutive month. The bank had been initially patient, accepting partial payments and agreeing to modified payment plans that seemed designed to help struggling families maintain their housing. But patience, we learned, has limits determined by profit margins rather than human circumstances. And those limits had been reached 3 weeks ago, when the bank informed us that all previous accommodations were being terminated and full payment of back due amounts, plus penalties and legal fees, was required within 30 days or foreclosure proceedings would begin immediately. The total amount due was $47,000. Money we didn't have, couldn't borrow, and had no realistic way to earn in the time we had been given. Have you ever held your family's future in your hands when you were barely old enough to vote? When everyone else had given up, but you couldn't let go of the belief that there had to be another way, some solution that adults had overlooked because they'd forgotten what it felt like to believe in impossible things. That's where I was at 2 a.m., holding that foreclosure notice and refusing to accept that my family's 15 years of building something permanent could be erased by one unfortunate accident and a system that treated housing as commodity rather than human necessity. The next 72 hours would either prove that I was right to keep believing or teach me the hardest lesson about the difference between determination and delusion. I had spent the previous 3 weeks researching every possible solution I could imagine. Emergency assistance programs that had waiting lists measured in months rather than days. Nonprofit organizations that offered limited help with utility bills, but nothing substantial enough to prevent foreclosure. Family members who were facing their own financial struggles and couldn't provide the kind of help we needed. I had contacted lawyers who specialized in foreclosure defense, only to learn that legal strategies required time and money we didn't have. I had researched bankruptcy options, which would destroy my parents' credit for years, and still might not save our house. I had even looked into selling our furniture and possessions, which might generate a few $1,000s but nowhere near the amount we owed. Every legitimate option I explored led to the same conclusion. There was no legal, practical way to generate $47,000 in 72 hours with the resources our family had available. But I kept researching because giving up felt like betraying everything my parents had taught me about persistence and problem solving. And somewhere in those desperate midnight internet searches, I found something that terrified me more than losing our house. An opportunity that could save us or destroy us completely. The numbers didn't lie, but I wasn't ready to accept what they were telling me. The opportunity I had discovered was both simple and dangerous. Cryptocurrency trading with leverage, using borrowed money to amplify potential gains from rapid price movements in digital currencies. Online forums were full of stories about people who had made thousands of dollars in days through careful analysis and strategic risk-taking. But those same forums were also full of warnings about people who had lost everything. Life savings, college funds, retirement accounts, through the same strategies that had made others wealthy. Leverage trading was essentially gambling with borrowed money, hoping that price movements would go in your favor quickly enough to generate profits before interest payments consumed your capital. The minimum investment required was $5,000, money I could access by liquidating the small emergency fund I had built through years of part-time work and business ventures. If the trades went well, I could potentially generate the $47,000 we needed within 72 hours. If they went badly, I would lose everything I had saved and might actually owe more money than we already couldn't afford to pay. But there was an even more dangerous option that promised faster results: joining what appeared to be a sophisticated pump and dump scheme, where coordinated groups would artificially inflate the price of specific cryptocurrencies and then sell at peak prices before the artificial demand collapsed. The organizers claimed they could guarantee specific returns within specific timeframes, and their track record seemed to support their promises. All I had to do was provide initial capital and follow their precise buying and selling instructions. The potential returns were exactly what we needed, and the timeline matched our 72-hour deadline perfectly. The problem was that pump and dump schemes were illegal, and participants could face federal charges for market manipulation. Even if the plan worked and generated the money we needed to save our house, I could end up in prison, destroying my future to save my family's present. I spent hours reading legal documents and forum discussions, trying to understand the exact risks and potential consequences. The more I learned, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about choosing what kind of person I was willing to become under extreme pressure. That's when I found something that scared me more than losing our house, an opportunity that could save us or ruin us completely. But as I sat there at 3 a.m., surrounded by printouts of investment strategies and legal warnings, I realized that I was looking at this problem backward. Instead of trying to find ways to generate $47,000 through speculation or schemes, maybe I should be looking for ways to use the skills I actually possessed to create legitimate value for people who were willing to pay for it. I was good with technology. I was good at building websites and managing social media and creating digital solutions for small businesses. What if I could find a way to monetize those skills at a level I had never attempted before? The idea that began forming was ambitious to the point of seeming delusional. Offer comprehensive digital transformation services to businesses that desperately needed online presence but couldn't afford traditional marketing agencies. Not just websites or social media management, but complete digital overhauls that would dramatically increase their customer base and revenue. Instead of charging small monthly fees like I had done throughout high school, I would charge substantial project fees for comprehensive solutions that would transform how businesses operated online. The services would be intensive, requiring me to work virtually around the clock for the next 72 hours, but the potential income could reach the levels we needed. The challenge was finding clients willing to pay premium prices for services from an 18-year-old they had never heard of, especially on such short notice. But desperation, I realized, was something I shared with many small business owners who had been struggling to adapt to an increasingly digital economy. If I could identify businesses that were facing their own crisis situations, restaurants losing customers to online competitors, retail stores struggling with decreased foot traffic, service companies that couldn't reach new clients, maybe I could position myself as their emergency solution while they became my emergency income source. I had found the solution, but the price might be everything I believed about myself. The next 18 hours became a blur of research, planning, and preparation. I identified 23 local businesses that appeared to be struggling with online presence, researched their current digital strategies, and developed comprehensive proposals for dramatic improvements that could be implemented within 72 hours. The proposals were more ambitious than anything I had ever attempted. Instead of simple websites, I was offering complete e-commerce platforms with inventory management, customer relationship systems, and automated marketing campaigns. Instead of basic social media posting, I was proposing comprehensive digital advertising strategies that would reach new customer demographics and drive immediate sales increases. Each proposal was customized to address specific problems I had identified through careful analysis of their current online presence. The restaurant that had outdated photos and no online ordering system, the retail store that had no e-commerce capability and was losing customers to online competitors, the home improvement company that had no digital marketing and was relying entirely on word-of-mouth referrals. The pricing was aggressive, between $3,000 and $8,000 per project, depending on complexity. Prices that would normally require months of relationship building and reputation establishing, but which I was proposing to deliver based on portfolio examples and the promise of immediate, measurable results. The most important element of each proposal was the guarantee. If the digital improvements didn't generate measurable increases in customer engagement and sales within 30 days, I would refund the entire project fee. It was a risk that could bankrupt me if the projects failed, but it was also the only way to convince skeptical business owners to bet on an 18-year-old during their own crisis situations. 72 hours to choose between saving my family and saving my soul. But as I finalized the proposals and prepared to start making phone calls, I realized that this wasn't actually a choice between family and values. It was a choice between taking the easy way that compromised everything I believed in and taking the impossible way that proved everything I believed about hard work and legitimate value creation. I wasn't going to save our house through speculation or schemes. I was going to save it by proving that an 18-year-old with the right skills and unlimited determination could create enough value in 72 hours to solve problems that seemed impossible to solve. I rejected the easy way and chose the impossible way, proving that an 18-year-old could do what no one thought possible. The first phone call was to Maria Santos, who owned a small Mexican restaurant that had been struggling since the pandemic forced most dining to shift online. Her current website looked like it had been built in 2005. She had no online ordering system, and her social media presence consisted of sporadic photos posted whenever she remembered to take them. "Ms. Santos," I said when she answered her phone, "my name is Jordan Mitchell, and I specialize in digital solutions for restaurants that want to dramatically increase their takeout and delivery orders. I've analyzed your current online presence, and I believe I can triple your online sales within 72 hours. There was a long pause. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" I explained my background, showed her examples of previous work I had done for other local businesses, and outlined specifically what I could accomplish for her restaurant. Complete website redesign with online ordering integration, professional food photography and menu optimization, automated social media campaigns targeting local customers who ordered takeout frequently, integration with all major delivery platforms, customer email list development and retention marketing. "This sounds expensive," she said. "And how do I know you can actually do what you're promising?" "The project fee is $4,500, I told her, "but I guarantee that your online orders will increase by at least 200% within 30 days, or I'll refund every penny. And I can have everything completed and launched by Thursday evening." Another long pause. "You're telling me you can rebuild my entire online presence in 3 days?" "I'm telling you I can build you the online presence you should have had years ago, and I can do it in 3 days because I don't have any other choice. Your restaurant needs customers, and my family needs this project to succeed. That means we both have everything to gain and nothing to lose." Maria agreed to meet me that afternoon to discuss details. The second call was to David Kim, who owned a small electronics repair shop that was losing customers to chain stores and online services. His website hadn't been updated in 5 years, he had no social media presence, and most potential customers didn't even know his business existed. "Mr. Kim," I said, "what if I told you that I could build you a customer base of people who specifically prefer local, personalized service over chain store impersonality, and I could do it in 3 days?" The conversation followed a similar pattern: initial skepticism, detailed explanation of services, demonstration of previous work, guarantee of results, and finally agreement to meet in person to discuss the project. By the end of the first day, I had scheduled meetings with 7 business owners who were interested enough in my proposals to give me an opportunity to present detailed plans and portfolios. Not all of them would say yes, but I only needed 3 or 4 successful projects to generate the money we needed. Each hour that passed brought us closer to foreclosure, but it also brought me closer to proving that legitimate value creation could solve problems that seemed to require desperate measures. Every no brought me closer to understanding what yes would require. And what it required was proving over and over again that results mattered more than age, that guarantees mattered more than credentials, and that desperate situations could create extraordinary levels of motivation and capability. The meetings went better than I had dared to hope. Maria Santos was impressed by the detailed analysis I had done of her restaurant's market position and the specific strategies I had developed to reach customers who ordered takeout frequently. She signed a contract for the full website redesign and digital marketing package. David Kim was skeptical until I showed him examples of how other repair shops had used targeted online advertising to build customer bases of people who specifically valued local expertise over chain store convenience. He agreed to a modified version of my proposal that focused on search engine optimization and local marketing. By the end of the second day, I had secured 4 contracts totaling $22,000 in project fees. Not enough to cover our entire debt, but enough to prove that the strategy was working and to give me credibility for the larger projects I was pursuing. The most promising opportunity was with Jennifer Walsh, who owned a small accounting firm that had been struggling to compete with online tax preparation services and larger accounting companies. She was interested in a comprehensive digital transformation that would help her firm specialize in personalized financial planning for small business owners, a niche that required exactly the kind of local expertise and personal relationships that technology couldn't replicate. The project fee for her complete digital overhaul was $15,000, which would bring my total to $37,000. Still short of what we needed, but close enough that I could probably negotiate payment plans or find additional smaller projects to cover the gap. But Jennifer wanted to see a detailed portfolio and speak with references before committing to such a substantial investment. She scheduled a meeting for the following morning, 12 hours before our foreclosure deadline. With 12 hours left, I finally found someone willing to believe in the impossible. The meeting with Jennifer Walsh was unlike any business conversation I had ever had. Instead of focusing on my age or experience level, she asked detailed questions about my technical capabilities, my understanding of accounting industry challenges, and my strategies for helping small firms compete with larger competitors. "Jordan," she said after reviewing my portfolio and speaking with 3 of my previous clients, "I've been in business for 12 years, and I've never met someone your age who understands business dynamics the way you do. But this is a substantial investment for my firm, and I need to understand why you're willing to guarantee such dramatic results." I had prepared for this question, but answering it honestly required revealing more about my personal situation than I was comfortable sharing with a potential client. "Ms. Walsh," I said, "my family is facing foreclosure this afternoon if I can't generate the money to save our house. This isn't just about business for me, it's about proving that someone my age can create enough value to solve problems that seem impossible to solve. Your firm gets the benefit of working with someone who literally cannot afford to fail." Instead of being concerned about my desperation, Jennifer seemed impressed by my honesty and motivated by the opportunity to be part of something meaningful. "I've been where your family is," she said. 8 years ago, I almost lost my business because I couldn't compete with bigger firms that had better marketing and online presence. Someone took a chance on me when I needed it most, and it changed everything. She signed the contract for the full digital transformation package, with half the fee paid immediately and half due upon completion of the project. I had saved our house, but I had also saved something more important, my family's faith in the impossible. The drive home with Jennifer's check in my pocket was the longest and shortest 20 minutes of my life. Longest because I was exhausted from 72 hours of the most intense work I had ever done. Shortest because I was racing to reach the bank before it closed, carrying enough money to prevent our foreclosure with literally hours to spare. Walking into the bank that had been threatening to take our house, carrying a check that represented 72 hours of proving that impossible, was just another word for what no one had tried yet. Felt like the most surreal moment of my 18 years. The loan officer who had handled our foreclosure case looked confused when I requested to speak with her about making a substantial payment on our delinquent account. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, checking our file on her computer. "According to our records, your family was scheduled for foreclosure proceedings this afternoon. Are you here to discuss a payment plan?" "No, ma'am," I said, placing Jennifer's check on her desk along with a bank draft for the additional amount needed to cover all back payments, penalties, and fees. "I'm here to bring our account current and request that all foreclosure proceedings be terminated immediately." The loan officer stared at the checks, then at me, then back at the checks. "Where did this money come from?" she asked. "I earned it," I said. "Through my business, providing digital marketing services to local companies. Is there anything else you need from me to process these payments and confirm that our house is no longer subject to foreclosure?" 45 minutes later, I walked out of that bank with receipts showing that our mortgage was current, our foreclosure had been canceled, and our family's home was secure. But the most important achievement wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that I had found a way to solve an impossible problem through legitimate means, that I had created genuine value for people who needed it, and that I had proven something about the power of determination combined with useful skills. The conversation with my parents that evening was unlike any conversation we had ever had. When I showed them the bank receipts and explained what I had accomplished over the previous 72 hours, they looked at me like they were seeing someone they had never met before. "Son," Dad said, his voice shaking with emotion, "how did you do this? How did you generate this much money in 3 days?" I explained the strategy, the clients, the guarantees I had made, and the projects I would be working on over the next month to deliver the results I had promised. "You risked everything," Mom said. "What if the projects had failed? What if you couldn't deliver what you promised?" "Then I would have learned that failure is better than not trying," I said. But I didn't just believe I could do it. I knew I could do it, because I had already been doing smaller versions of the same work for years. I just had to prove that I could do it at a level that mattered. Dad pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any hug we had shared since I was a child. "You saved our family," he whispered. "But more than that, you showed us what our son is capable of achieving when everything depends on it." 72 hours had changed everything, but the real transformation was just beginning. What would you risk to save everything your family built? When does believing in yourself become the only option left? Have you ever had to choose between accepting defeat and creating victory, even when victory seemed impossible to achieve? These weren't abstract questions anymore. They were the realities I had lived through, the choices I had made, and the lessons I carried forward into a completely different understanding of what I was capable of accomplishing. The month that followed was the most intense educational experience of my life. Delivering on the guarantees I had made required working 18-hour days, learning new skills in real time, and managing client expectations while exceeding my own previous capabilities. But every project succeeded beyond what I had promised. Maria's restaurant saw online orders increase by 340% within 3 weeks. David's repair shop developed a customer base of local small business owners who valued his expertise and personal service. Jennifer's accounting firm positioned itself as the premier financial planning resource for entrepreneurs in our region. The success of those initial projects generated referrals and word-of-mouth recommendations that created demand for my services at levels I had never imagined. Within 6 months, I was managing digital marketing for over 30 local businesses, had hired 2 part-time assistants, and was generating monthly income that exceeded what my father had earned before his injury. But the most meaningful transformation wasn't financial. It was the change in how our family understood our own capabilities and our place in the community. Instead of being the family that almost lost their house, we became the family whose teenage son had built a business that was helping other local families succeed. Dad became my business partner, using his project management experience and community relationships to help expand our client base and improve our service delivery. His injury had ended his construction career, but it had also freed him to discover talents and interests that his previous job had never required. Mom reduced her teaching hours and started handling our company's financial management and client relations. Her communication skills and natural empathy made her invaluable for building trust with business owners who were initially skeptical about working with such a young service provider. 1 year after that 72-hour countdown to foreclosure, we were living in the same house but occupying a completely different life. The mortgage was not only current, but ahead of schedule due to the additional payments we were making from business profits. More importantly, we had discovered that our family's greatest asset wasn't our house. It was our ability to work together to solve problems that seemed impossible to solve. The business had grown beyond local digital marketing. We were now providing comprehensive business development services, helping small companies develop strategic plans, improve operational efficiency, and access resources they needed for sustainable growth. Our client base included businesses from 3 states, and we were being invited to speak at conferences about rural entrepreneurship and family business development. But the achievement I was most proud of wasn't business growth or financial success. It was the knowledge that I had found a way to turn crisis into opportunity, that I had used skills and determination to create value for other people while solving my own family's problems. 2 years after our near foreclosure, I was invited to speak at my former high school's career day about entrepreneurship and crisis management. Standing in front of students who were the same age I had been when our family almost lost everything, I tried to explain what I had learned about the difference between accepting circumstances and changing circumstances. 2 years ago, I told them, my family was 72 hours away from losing our house, and I was the only one who still believed we could save it. What I learned is that believing isn't enough. You have to be willing to work harder than you've ever worked, risk more than you've ever risked, and prove that impossible is just another word for what no one has tried yet. I talked about the importance of developing skills that could create immediate value for people who needed solutions to urgent problems. About understanding that age and credentials matter less than results and guarantees. About recognizing that the worst moments in your life can become the foundation for the best chapters of your story. The question isn't whether you'll face situations that seem impossible to solve, I continued. The question is whether you'll use those situations to discover what you're actually capable of achieving when everything depends on your success. After my presentation, a senior named Marcus approached me with questions about starting his own business. His family was facing similar challenges: medical debt, threat of foreclosure, parents who had given up hope that their situation could improve. The situation you're describing sounds exactly like what my family went through, I told him. And what I learned is that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, but only if you're willing to use it as motivation to achieve something you never thought possible. I offered him an internship with our company, the opportunity to learn business development skills while earning money to help his family and gaining experience that would be valuable regardless of his future plans. 6 months later, Marcus had developed enough expertise to start managing his own client accounts, and his family had avoided foreclosure through the additional income his work generated. But more importantly, he had learned what I had learned, that young people with limited resources but unlimited determination could solve problems that seemed too big for adults to handle. The ripple effects of our family's transformation had become a wave that lifted other families facing similar challenges. Our business had become more than a service provider. It had become proof that circumstances don't determine destiny, that age doesn't determine capability, and that the most powerful solutions often come from the people who have the most to lose by failing. 3 years after that 72-hour deadline, Dad and I were featured in a regional business magazine as Father-Son Entrepreneurs of the Year. The article described our journey from near foreclosure to business success, but what meant the most to me wasn't the recognition. It was the knowledge that our story had inspired other families to believe that transformation was possible. The interview included a question that I had been thinking about for months. What would have happened if you had given up during those 72 hours? If you had accepted that the situation was impossible to solve? I thought about that alternate timeline for a moment, our family homeless, my parents' dreams destroyed, my own future limited by the trauma of watching everything we had built disappear through circumstances we couldn't control. I think, I said finally, we would have survived, but we never would have discovered what we were actually capable of achieving. Sometimes the most important gift you can give your family isn't protection from crisis, but the demonstration that crisis can be transformed into opportunity if you're willing to work hard enough and believe strongly enough in solutions that don't exist yet. Dad nodded. What Jordan taught our family is that the difference between families that survive setbacks and families that thrive after setbacks is whether they use their challenges as excuses or as motivation. What's the most important lesson you want other families to learn from your experience? The reporter asked. That 72 hours can change everything, I replied, but only if you're willing to spend those 72 hours proving that impossible is just another word for what no one has tried yet. 4 years after our foreclosure deadline, I was preparing to start my sophomore year at State University, having deferred college enrollment to build our business, but finally ready to combine formal education with real-world experience. The business was stable enough to run without my daily involvement, and I had decided that the best way to serve our clients and our community was to develop additional skills that could help us expand our impact. But the most meaningful achievement wasn't business success or educational plans. It was the relationship between a father and son who had learned that the strongest families are forged not in comfort, but in crisis, not in success, but in the struggle to transform setbacks into setups for something better. On the 4th anniversary of our near foreclosure, Dad and I drove past other houses in our neighborhood that had foreclosure notices posted in their front yards. Families facing the same crisis we had faced, the same choice between accepting defeat and fighting for survival. Should we reach out to them? Dad asked. Offer to help them explore options they might not know exist? Absolutely, I said. But not just us, our whole network. Maria's restaurant, David's repair shop, Jennifer's accounting firm, all the businesses we've helped succeed. Maybe we can create opportunities for families in crisis to solve their problems by creating value for businesses that need their skills. That conversation became the foundation for our next venture, a nonprofit organization that connected families facing financial crisis with local businesses that needed services those families could provide. Emergency financial relief through immediate income opportunities rather than charity that created dependence. The program launched 6 months later with partnerships from 43 local businesses and referrals from banks, legal aid societies, and community organizations that worked with families facing foreclosure. In the first year, we helped 67 families avoid losing their homes by creating income opportunities that matched their skills with business needs in our community. But the most important success wasn't preventing foreclosures. It was proving that communities could solve their own problems by connecting people who needed opportunities with people who needed services. That crisis could become catalyst for innovation and mutual support. 5 years after our 72-hour deadline, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee about innovative approaches to foreclosure prevention and rural economic development. Sitting at that witness table, representing not just my own family's success, but the success of every family whose crisis had become catalyst for community transformation, I felt the weight of responsibility that comes with unexpected opportunities to influence policy. Representatives, I began. 5 years ago, my family was 72 hours away from losing our house, and I was an 18-year-old with more determination than experience, trying to prove that age doesn't determine capability and that circumstances don't determine destiny. I presented research about the economic impact of our foreclosure prevention program, statistics about job creation and business development in communities that had adopted similar models, and policy recommendations for supporting local entrepreneurship as a strategy for addressing housing instability. The most important lesson we learned, I explained, is that the people facing crisis are often the most motivated to create solutions, and that communities become stronger when they provide opportunities for mutual support rather than one-way assistance. I outlined proposals for state funding to support community-based entrepreneurship programs, tax incentives for businesses that hired people facing financial crisis, and partnerships between educational institutions and local businesses to provide skills training that led to immediate employment opportunities. Economic development isn't about attracting outside companies to create jobs, I concluded. It's about empowering local people to create their own opportunities, to solve their own problems, and to prove that every community has untapped potential that can be activated by the right combination of crisis and opportunity. After the hearing, several representatives approached me with questions about implementing similar programs in their districts. Others asked about the policy changes that could make entrepreneurship more accessible to people facing economic challenges. But the conversation that meant the most came from a committee staff member who pulled me aside after the formal proceedings ended. "My family is facing foreclosure next month," she said quietly. "After hearing your testimony, I think there might be options I haven't considered. Do you have any advice for someone who feels like they've exhausted all the legitimate solutions?" I gave her my contact information and offered to connect her with resources and mentorship that could help her explore entrepreneurial options. "The most important thing," I told her, "is understanding that crisis creates clarity about what really matters, and that clarity can become the foundation for opportunities you never would have discovered in normal circumstances." That conversation reminded me that our family's story had never been just about us. It had been about proving that transformation was possible, that 72 hours could change everything, and that the people who witnessed your crisis could become the people who celebrated your success. 6 years after those 72 hours that changed everything, I was invited to give the commencement address at my former high school. Standing at that podium, looking out at graduates who represented the same hopes and challenges I had faced at 18, I thought about the journey that had brought our family from foreclosure to financial stability, from crisis to community leadership. 6 years ago, I told them, I was sitting where you're sitting now, believing that success meant avoiding problems and following predetermined paths. What I learned is that success actually means using problems as opportunities to discover what you're capable of achieving when everything depends on your ability to create solutions that don't exist yet. I talked about the importance of developing skills that could create immediate value for people facing urgent challenges, about understanding that age and credentials matter less than results and determination, about recognizing that the most powerful transformations often begin with the most devastating setbacks. Some of you will face circumstances that seem impossible to overcome, I continued. Some of you will discover that the plans you made don't survive contact with the realities you encounter. Some of you will find yourselves in situations where everyone else has given up, but you still believe that solutions are possible. I looked out at faces that represented every kind of background and circumstance, knowing that some of them would face challenges I couldn't imagine, while others would encounter the same kinds of systematic barriers that had almost destroyed my family. When that happens, I concluded, remember that you have 72 hours to prove that impossible is just another word for what no one has tried yet. That crisis can become catalyst, that setbacks can become setups, and that the most important question isn't whether you can avoid problems, but whether you can transform problems into proof of what you're actually capable of achieving. The applause was generous, but the moment that mattered most came afterward, when a graduate named Sarah approached me with tears in her eyes. "My family is facing foreclosure," she whispered. "I graduate next week, but I don't know if we'll have a place to live. After hearing your speech, I think there might be options I haven't considered." I handed her my business card and smiled. There are always options you haven't considered. The question is whether you're ready to work harder than you've ever worked to discover what they are. If you believe that 72 hours can change everything, that the most powerful solutions come from the people who have the most to lose by failing, and that circumstances don't determine destiny, that determination determines circumstances, then this story matters to you too. Subscribe for more stories about young people who refused to accept that impossible was permanent, who learned that crisis can become catalyst for transformation, and who discovered that the most important inheritance you can give your family isn't protection from problems, but the demonstration that problems can be solved through determination, creativity, and the willingness to work harder than anyone expects someone your age to work. Because those 72 hours taught me something no classroom ever could, that sometimes you have 72 hours to prove that the impossible is just another word for what no one has tried yet. That age doesn't determine capability, that circumstances don't determine destiny, and that the most powerful weapon against systemic barriers is the combination of useful skills and unlimited determination. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that transformation is always possible, that the worst moments can become the foundation for the best chapters, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is proving that their child inherited not just their struggles, but their strength multiplied by the courage to use it in ways they never imagined possible. Because sometimes 72 hours is all you need to prove that everything you thought was impossible was just waiting for someone desperate enough, determined enough, and foolish enough to believe that solutions exist for people willing to work hard enough to find them.